a friend of mine.
Jesus is my friend.
Jesus is a friend of
I
mine.
have a friend in Jesus.
Jesus is a friend of mine.
Jesus is my friend.
Jesus.
It's been said that Jesus was the greatest liberal the world has ever seen. He was a socialist who spoke out against the moneylenders in the temple. He was the world's first feminist, and also he would be pro-gay today, because overall he loved everyone, defended the weak and the poor.
Yeah, well, let's take these points one by one. In general, it should be seen as a part of the usual missionary strategy to make Jesus in the image of the sensitivities of the public that is addressed. So on Wall Street they're not going to say this, but to a relatively poor audience, you see, this will sound very good. Now, in general, I dare say that this is not true at all. You can easily counter this with chapter and verse from the Gospel.
So, I mean, basically, you know, they say that he was a great liberal. I mean, there's, you know, he was doing these type of activities. So, you know, looking after the poor.
Well, I am in agreement that the military-industrial complex would not have much use for Jesus. You see, in that sense, maybe you could say he was on the left. But, you know, when you go into these claims more specifically, they stand exposed. Let's take first a very common example is the Merciful Samaritan. Now, what he did was to help someone who was shunned by a respectable society, and you see, when he was wounded, you know, he nursed him back to health, or had him nursed back to health. But he did not ask the taxpayer to do this. He did not ask the state to do this. He did it himself. And as Margaret Thatcher said, he was not only merciful, he also had money. And otherwise nobody would have heard of him, because he would not have been in a position to help. So he did not want the state to be done it, he did his charity himself. Now, that's fine, I have nothing against that story, but it's not socialism. You know, to link that to the modern notion of socialism is just wrong. Similarly, was Jesus a feminist? Well, you see, women appear in his stories, but in most stories they do. There is absolutely no indication that Mary Magdalene or other women in his life were, as they now say, empowered to compete with men in society. Women had the traditional role of being pious supporters, of helping him. It is said in so many words in the Gospel that he was financially helped by a few women. You see, that they kept him going, as modern devotees, usually women, still do. But, you know, there is nothing about the role of women that he wanted changed. He was not in rebellion against patriarchy or so. A specific instance of where he deals very favorably with a woman is the adulterous woman who is about to get stoned. So he saves her life, that much is certainly true, by appealing to the conscience of the people who are about to stone her. So he tells everyone, well, if you want to punish this woman for her sins, let him himself be without sin. He who is without sin cast the first stone. So they all think twice and ultimately go away. You know, as the story says, the eldest first, because they are rather more modest by all the events they have been through. But then he tells the woman, okay, has nobody condemned you? No, nobody has condemned me. Well, in that case, go away and don't sin anymore. That is to say, he is upholding the existing morality. So, whatever you think of that morality, at any rate, he was not in rebellion against it. So, in that respect, he was not particularly what we would imagine to be a leftist.
What about defending the weak and the poor and how doing charity?
Well, he was not changing their role. You see, it's like a wealthy philanthropist who, rather than entrusting his money to the state and hoping that they will do the right thing with it, sets up charities himself, like Bill Gates does, like other rich people do. And so that is more the Jesus approach. You know, about the role of the state he doesn't talk anywhere. As for the poor, he says explicitly that you will always have the poor with you. You see, he says to people, celebrate while the bridegroom is among you, meaning himself. Because he was right there among them, whereas the poor are always among them. So he says explicitly something that you would not expect if he had a plan for making poverty history, or some other good sounding socialist slogan. So he did not have any plan for a political solution. Indeed, you see, that precisely is typically Jesus, as he is made to say by the gospel writers, my kingdom is not of this world. So he doesn't count on worldly institutions. You see, it's all an inner process. You have to, you know, what Christians call, you have to convert to the charity, the good nature within yourself. So he's not anti-socialist, but he's not socialist either.
No socialist. If he was around now, there's a lot of people saying that he would be totally against conservative Christians. Yeah, he would be pro-gay, and you know, he'd be totally speaking out against them. Would that be true?
Yes, well, on the gay agenda, as far as I know, the gospel is completely silent. So, if perforce you want to make Jesus say anything on that, you could say that he pursued a don't ask, don't tell policy.
Okay.
You know, more generally, would he be against conservative Christians? Well, to the extent that they are pursuing the Christian agenda of conversion worldwide, he would certainly be in favor of conservative
So you'd be very happy about it.
As for their more specific agenda, like upholding the Christian nature of the American states, you know, that is not especially Jesus-like. The first Christians had to live in the Roman Empire, so they, you know, whether they liked it or not, they had to adapt to Roman law. And later, when the church acquires power, it still does not impose its own law. You see, it conforms to the worldly laws imposed by the state rulers. It says explicitly, vivit ecclesia lege Romana, which means the church lives by Roman law. So it is not particular about grabbing state power, not like Islam. But specific points on the conservative Christian agenda should be looked at case by case. For example, prohibiting abortion. You see, that is an issue on which the gospel does not speak out. People who say, oh, Jesus would have been a liberal, well, they are claiming far more than they can possibly know. Though perhaps it is possible, but it would be against the traditional stricture of saving human life at any cost.
Yeah, but wasn't he in the New Testament doing a reformation, or reforming, the Old Testament? Wasn't he against the Old Testament?
Yes, you know, in that sense you could say that from the Christian angle. I doubt that Jews would agree with this, but from a Christian angle, the Old Testament is like the bad cop and the New Testament like the good cop. There is not fundamental opposition. You see, there was an early church father called Merciful who proposed to just drop the Old Testament altogether. And the church opposed this because while they agreed that there were fundamental changes from the Old to the New Testament, ultimately the mission of Jesus was dependent on concepts created in the Old Testament. Like Jesus is the Messiah, that wouldn't mean anything if you don't go back to the Old Testament concept of Messiah. Similarly, he saved mankind from sin. You have to go back to the ultimate beginning of the Old Testament to get the concept of sin. So in that sense, you see, they're not fundamentally different. However, it is true that the law of Moses was abolished by Christianity. Not so much by Jesus himself. It is said in the Gospel that not an iota of the law shall be abandoned. So in a sense, you see, even though he was accused by the Pharisees of going against the law of Moses, he himself explicitly said that he was upholding the law of Moses. However, later on, a few years later only, in St. Paul, the law is effectively abolished. And so Christianity is thrown open to non-Jews who ultimately become the dominant element, and then through some events of history, particularly the Jewish revolt against the Romans, the Jewish branch of Christianity dies out. And so it is the vision of Paul that wins through.
Okay.
So you see, there Christianity drops a very important element of the Old Testament, namely the Mosaic law. However, you should be very careful with glorifying this. It has very often been used as an argument against the Jews, to say that Jesus was the first anti-Semite. Hitler, for example, said of himself that he was only doing the work of Jesus, that he was only continuing the anti-Jewish mission of Jesus. So be very careful when you demonize the Old Testament.
And doesn't he say in, I forget which Matthew it is, I've come to re-establish the law of the prophets or something?
Yes, exactly. Just like the Buddha in Hinduism, in fact. You see, the Buddha, contrary to what is often said by his followers in India nowadays, came to uphold the Vedas, or what he conceived to be the spirit of the Vedas. That's why he calls his movement Arya, which is a term that refers directly to the Vedas. So you see, Jesus was also some kind of reformer who ultimately saw his reform as a return to the roots.
To the roots, okay, that makes sense. So then definitely the clergy for 2,000 years, they didn't get his message wrong, because that's another thing you often hear by people now, especially New Agey type of crowd, that his teachings are misinterpreted by the clergy. For 2,000 years, they kind of got it all wrong. And
that's a bit pretentious of them to think that so many generations got it wrong and suddenly they have seen the light.
Yeah, suddenly.
See, what suddenly happened that made such a big difference?
Because all the denominations of Christianity seem to have got it wrong suddenly.
Yeah.
And okay, that makes sense. Why are Hindu gurus and Hindus obsessed with Jesus?
Well, a large part of it is simply appeasement of whatever they see as dominant, as hegemonic. So especially during the colonial period, Christianity was the norm to which everyone aspired, or a lot of people within Hinduism aspired. So you get the Brahmo Samaj, the Arya Samaj, that even when they claim to be resisting Christianity, are in fact interiorizing fundamental concepts from Christianity. For instance, monotheism, they claim that Hinduism is monotheistic. And so the figure of Jesus becomes really quite popular among Hindus. Now, in a sense, in the colonial context, this was a good thing, because it meant that Hindus could interiorize Jesus without interiorizing Christianity. You see, they made Jesus into something that he is not for Christians. You see, they made Jesus into some type of guru, some type of enlightened being, who is just one among many. You know, some Vaishnavas even make him into an incarnation of Vishnu. And of course Christians also say he's an incarnation, except that in Christianity he is the only incarnation, whereas for Vaishnavas he's just one among many.
So did he travel to India?
Well, there is no indication that Jesus ever traveled to India.
So it's just the P&O syndrome from Hindus or something?
Well, yes, you see, Indians are not the only ones who do fantasy when they claim to do history. There was a Russian nobleman, Nicholas Notovich, in about 1880. He wrote this book about Jesus in India. Now, even before doing any historical research, when you simply read the book, you already see immediately that this is a modern forgery. You see, the themes that he addresses are of no concern to a person in the 1st century. They are typically modern. You see, Russia at that time was the cradle or the hotbed of anarchism, which was a particular form of socialism. And so the themes, you know, that Notovich puts in the mouth of Jesus are typically of that background. Like he is very much concerned with equality, so he rebels against priestly authority, he rebels against the caste system and so on. Things that nobody did in the 1st century. So you can see that this is a forgery. Ultimately there was a debate about it involving Max Muller among others. And the British authorities sent some surveyors. They went to the monastery where he had claimed to have found Jesus' manuscript. The abbot, of course, denied ever having had such a manuscript. And ultimately Notovich was compelled to concede that it had all been a forgery. However, by that time, the story had been taken over by Mirza Ghulam Ahmed, the leader of the Ahmadiyya sect of Islam. He could use it because Jesus in India would mean that a prophet would not necessarily have to be from the Middle East. You know, India could also produce prophets, and therefore his own claim to prophethood would thereby be buttressed. So right now, even now, in Ahmadiyya centers you will still find literature about Jesus in India. And by now it has become widely accepted in New Age circles and among, well, let's say soft-brained Hindus.
So you know, you wrote a book on the psychology of prophets. I think you mentioned about Jesus suffering from some psychological problems and that. Can you go a bit more into depth?
Yes. Of course, the case of Jesus does not allow for very firm conclusions, because what we have about him as history is a bit vague, contradictory, and is a combination of things that are probably historically true, that are hard to explain if there is not some historical core, and then some general stereotypical things, like you see the story of his birth, you know, surrounded by angels and the magi, the kings coming to greet him and so on. The story of the mass killing after his birth. You see that story is also told about Krishna, for example. So this is a fairly common story. I mean, that isn't historical. Then you see there are two elements that seem to be historical. He clearly was a traveling healer. I mean, he was mostly known as a miracle healer. And a funny thing is that in tribal areas in India, where the missionaries try to sell their message by offering medical services and bringing in American doctors and American medicine, that the tribals call modern medicine Jesus medicine, as opposed to their own traditional herbal medicine. And the funny thing is that Jesus would not have recognized modern medicine, nor even herbal medicine, because at the time there was a big tradition of herbal medicine, which is still known in India, Unani Tib, which means Hellenistic medicine. And instead he was a typical, very primitive type of healer, namely an exorcist. You see, he associated diseases with spirits, and so he was driving out spirits.
Do you believe he existed? The Jesus that we know, that we see everywhere, pictures and memes on Facebook.
Right. Let me first say what the second historical thing is about Jesus, namely his arguments with the Pharisees. You see, clearly there was an argument among Jews based on traditional Jewish conceptions, you see, about which he differed in opinion with the Pharisees. And then there is another element in the Gospel that is clearly non-historical, that is general. Maybe he himself took it over, or maybe others put it into his mouth, namely his sermons, in which he conveys a lot of Buddhist lore. You see, there were Buddhist preachers all around India and probably also in the Middle East. So these Buddhist messages were somewhere in the air, and the Hellenistic world was somewhat like the modern West, where you see many conceptions or many ideas were being mixed. And so you had some kind of New Age people who were, you know, lovers of wisdom and took it from wherever they heard it. So either Jesus was one of those. You see, once he was taken to be a serious spiritual person, you see, he gave his audience what they longed for by repeating some of these wisdom sayings that ultimately he had from Buddhism, and who also made him most popular. Things like, you see, repay your enemies with kindness, and so on. So that may be historical or that may not be, we don't know.
Well, it could be several
it's a literary.
Yes,
exactly. You see, Jesus was, you know, the Jesus as we know from the Gospel was clearly a literary composite. Now, did he exist? Well, you see, there very likely was such a person. You see, there was some kind of traveling miracle healer who was noticed by the scripturalist Jewish establishment, who got into arguments with them, and then it seems that he was sentenced to death. Then maybe the Romans played a game by not letting him die. That's also the Muslim version. And there are elements in the Gospel that point to this. Of course, this we don't know for sure. But at any rate, you see,
but it's
and
not,
so that may explain the resurrection. You see, that he was not really dead. He was, of course, very, you know, affected in his health. So he was nursed back to life. And then when he reappeared, of course, everybody was shocked, thinking that he had died on the cross. So that would explain the story of the resurrection. But you see, much of this we don't know for sure.
Isn't Easter originally a pagan festival?
Of course. Well, Easter is generally a pagan festival, you know, the beginning of spring. Now, in the Mosaic law, it had already been turned into something else, namely the historical celebration of something that apparently had happened precisely at that time, namely the flight from Egypt, the Exodus. And then Christianity again turned it into something else, namely a commemoration of the resurrection of Jesus. But so yes, it has a long pre-Christian history, there's no doubt about it.
So I mean, there's another thing that I hear from Christians that look how popular Jesus is. We see by his popularity how powerful Jesus is. I mean, of course, they don't mention like gunboats and imperialism. So what's your view on that? What's the real reason? Why is he so popular?
Well, first of all, that he is popular really makes no difference.
It's true, even
it is quite possible nowadays with the means of advertisement, of mass psychology, to create a hype. And so Jesus is very much promoted, so logically there would be a large popularity going for him. But, you know, it is mainly the effect of missionary propaganda, directly or indirectly. Because now Jesus is so present in the mind of so many that even after they have abandoned Christianity, they will still somehow keep on promoting Jesus.
Yeah. Because you come from a Christian background, your uncle was a missionary and everything. How did you get out of it?
Well,
Or have you got out of it?
within my family, it still took some effort because, you know, I was the eldest son. And I mean, it's typically the eldest son that has the job of, going against the tradition. But you see, in my circle, there were many people in that situation. You know, when I went to school, everybody, literally everybody in my school went to Mass on Sunday. You see, now there are hardly a few. And so in those days, it was still rebelling against a very, very common religion. And but you know, there was no danger involved or anything. Here or there was somebody thrown out of the house. That was about the worst that could happen. And and on the other hand, the reverse also happened. That after a son stopped going to church, then his parents started doubting Christianity as well. Right, so in late 60s, early 70s, it was in my country, in Belgium, very common to walk out of the church. I mean, there was a big movement going on. Initially it took some courage, but gradually the power equation shifted, and it took, on the contrary, some non-conformism to remain a practicing Catholic. Suddenly it seemed all quaint. And so many people who had been Christians, because everybody was, suddenly also left the church. And so now we see being a Christian is a fairly exceptional position.
Yeah, true. I mean, is that also the reason we're seeing a bit of popularity of a lot of people coming into Hinduism or taking up Hindu practices?
Well, you see, people left Christianity mainly because they saw that it could not be sustained. You see, some kind of religiosity would remain meaningful, or you see, at that time people mostly discarded religion altogether, but later rediscovered religion, but then decided that, you see, they would give religion a place in their lives, but not Christianity. And so that is, I think, the normal position. You see, human beings have been religious to some extent, some more than others, since the beginning. You see, even monkeys already have elements of religion. So you know, I wouldn't join the so-called new atheists in denouncing religion altogether. But you see, the specific beliefs that make up the essence of Christianity, or for that matter of Islam, they are no longer sustainable. You know, like the resurrection, for example, is a nice story. But you know, to claim that as historical truth, that you can no longer sell to educated people. And so therefore, you see, the missionaries hope, you know, to convert as many as possible in India, for example, where they can still find a flock that is susceptible to those ideas.
So, you know, India or Hindus, what's the best defense for them in India against missionaries? And it's Jesus person.
Yes, well, you see, at an elite level, at an educated level, it is best to acquire a historical view of Jesus, and that would make, you know, Christianity just a human phenomenon, a human movement, which has some merits, but, you know, ultimately is not the truth, is not something that you should sacrifice your life for, is not something, you know, that should be used as orientation of society. You know, it's an interesting historical movement. I think now we don't need it anymore. But okay, you know, if some people perforce want to stay in it, well, you know, it's just that. It's a movement. It's a human movement. It's all its merits are merits of human beings. There is no God involved. There is no savior involved. At a popular level, I would say that Hindus have so far been doing all right. And you see, even this story about Jesus being a guru have ultimately served Hinduism right. You know, it has protected Hinduism from Christianity by creating a sort of watered down version of Jesus worship, which is very much short of accepting Christianity as a whole. However, even common Hindus don't need Jesus at all.
Yeah, yeah.
So you see, in India, if these Christian TV channels with these televangelists and so on get a bit less power or are given more competition from similar Hindu channels, you will see a change in public opinion. And also, you see in India they make quite a few converts with these funny campaigns about miracle healing.
Yeah.
Well, if that gets exposed a bit more systematically, if the Indian skeptics or so-called rationalists target Christianity as much as they target Hinduism, that would certainly help in taking the shine off Christianity.